The night in the outer colony was silent, heavy, and cold. Buildings made from metal scraps stood like broken teeth against the sky. Most people avoided this part of the colony, for it smelled of rust, smoke, and rot. But one man walked here, often. He was known only as David, a quiet human survivor who lived alone. He searched the ruins for food, tools, or anything that might be of use. On this night, as he moved carefully through the alleys, he stopped. His breath caught, and his eyes narrowed. There was a sound, a faint sound so soft it could almost be mistaken for the wind, yet it was not the wind. It was too fragile, too weak, and too alive. It was a cry. David froze, his ears straining. The sound was muffled, thin, almost lost in the shadows. He followed it, his boots crunching on gravel and broken glass. Each step brought the sound closer, clearer. His heart began to beat faster, not out of fear, but something else. A cry meant life, and life in this place was rare. He turned a corner into a narrow passage where the colony lights did not reach. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. There, against the cold wall of an abandoned shack, lay a small bundle wrapped in torn alien fabric. The sound came from within. David crouched down. His rough hands trembled as he pushed aside the filthy cloth. Inside, a tiny face appeared, pale and fragile, with small ridges on the skin that marked it as not human. An alien baby. Its lips quivered as it tried to cry, but the sound was weak, more like a whimper than a scream. The child was starving. David's chest tightened. He looked around, scanning the shadows. Someone must have left the baby here. The tracks in the dust suggested a woman had been here earlier, but the trail disappeared quickly into the night. Whoever had carried the child had abandoned it. His mind struggled to understand. Why would a mother leave her own child? Was it fear, hunger, or cruelty? His thoughts raced, but the truth was clear before his eyes. The baby would die here alone. David lifted the child gently, feeling its fragile weight in his arms. The small body was so light it felt like air, yet so heavy with the burden of survival. The baby's breathing was shallow and its skin was cold. He knew what this meant. If he walked away, the child would not last another hour. If he took it, he would be breaking the colony's harshest law. Helping aliens was forbidden. Those caught offering shelter or aid were punished severely. Some lost their homes. Others vanished completely. But as David looked down at the baby's trembling form, none of that mattered. A helpless life was before him. Rules were words. Life was flesh and blood. He wrapped the child tighter and held it close to his chest. The baby's tiny hands reached weakly, clutching his shirt as if begging not to be left again. That simple touch broke the last wall of hesitation inside him. The wind howled through the empty streets as David carried the baby back toward his shelter. Every shadow seemed deeper, every noise sharper, as though the world itself watched and judged him. He felt the weight of danger, yet also the strange weight of purpose. For years he had wandered alone, surviving only for himself. Now in one night he carried a new reason to keep breathing. When he reached his small hideout, a room hidden behind rusted panels and broken machinery, he lit a dim lamp. The weak glow fell across the baby's face. Its eyes opened slightly, revealing a dull but beautiful shade of violet. They flickered with life, struggling against the pull of darkness. David laid the baby on a piece of cloth and searched his supplies. He had little food left, dry bread, some water, and a few sealed packets of rations. None of it was meant for an alien child. He cursed under his breath, torn between despair and determination. He crushed a small piece of ration, mixed it with water, and brought it to the child's lips. At first the baby was too weak to respond, but slowly a drop passed into its mouth, then another. A faint stir, a flicker of hope. Hours passed as David worked to keep the baby alive. He fed it in small drops, wrapped it in every cloth he could find, and kept it close to the warmth of his own body. Each tiny breath was a victory. Each small twitch of its hand was a reason to continue. Yet the questions haunted him. Who was the mother? Why had she left the child in the darkness? Was she still out there, starving and hopeless? Or had she given up completely? David did not know, but one thing was certain. The cry in the darkness had found him, and now it would never leave him. For the first time in years, he was not alone. The alien mother's steps dragged across the empty streets, her body weak from days without food. Her name was Sarah, though no one in the colony cared to know it. Once, she had lived in a small community outside the main walls. But war had broken her people apart. Disease and hunger had stolen her strength. Now only a fragile baby remained as proof that she had once dreamed of a better future. The child had been born sickly, with ribs showing beneath the thin skin, eyes too tired to shine. Sarah had tried everything. She searched for scraps in the garbage pits, begged at the gates, even traded her few belongings for drops of milk. Yet nothing was enough. Each night her baby grew weaker, his cries softer, and each night she felt her own body fail, until walking felt like carrying a mountain. She knew the humans of the colony would not help. They had made the rules clear. No alien was welcome, no alien child worth saving. She had seen what happened to those who asked for mercy. They were cast out, beaten, or simply vanished. The humans had grown cruel, protecting their own while turning their faces from suffering. So when the final night came, Sarah made a choice no mother should ever face. She wrapped her baby in what little cloth she still owned. Her tears fell across his small face as she kissed his forehead one last time. Then, with trembling hands, she placed him against the wall of a deserted alley. She told herself that maybe someone would hear the cries. Maybe someone with a kinder heart than hers would stop. Her stomach twisted with shame as she stepped back, hiding in the shadows. She wanted to run, yet her legs would not carry her far. She wanted to stay, yet she feared her weakness would doom the child. Her heart broke in silence. From the darkness, she watched the bundle stir. The cries were faint but steady, echoing in the cold. She covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Every instinct screamed at her to pick him up again, to hold him close, but her arms hung lifeless at her side. She whispered to herself, "Forgive me, my little one." Minutes turned into hours. Sarah's vision blurred, her body swaying with exhaustion. Then she saw movement. A figure approached, tall and cautious. Her heart leapt, fear, hope, and dread all at once. It was a human. She shrank deeper into the shadows, clutching the wall for support. Humans hated her kind. If he saw her, he might strike her down without hesitation, yet she could not turn away. Her eyes locked on him as he bent down to the bundle. She saw the lamp of his eyes widen when he discovered her baby. Her breath caught. What would he do? Would he walk away, leaving the child to die as she had done? Or would he call the patrols, who would kill the baby instantly? But then she saw something she never expected. The man lifted the baby, holding him close against his chest. The child's tiny hands clutched at his shirt, and the human did not pull away. His face softened, lined with concern, not hatred. He looked around as if searching for someone, perhaps the mother who had left her child. For a moment, Sarah feared. His eyes would find hers, but he turned instead toward the streets and began to carry the baby away. Sarah fell to her knees. Relief flooded her chest, though shame quickly followed. The human had done what she could not. He had chosen to save. Her tears fell freely now. She whispered, "Please protect him. Please keep him safe." Her body shook with sobs, her strength nearly gone. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall and prayed, not to gods but to fate itself, that this stranger's arms would be stronger than hers. The night dragged on, and Sarah wandered away from the alley. Her body felt like an empty shell, every step heavier than the last. Yet in her heart a tiny spark glowed. The human had not abandoned her child. Maybe there was hope in a world that had forgotten mercy. Still, the guilt gnawed at her. A mother should never leave her child. The image of his tiny face, weak and crying, haunted her every breath. She wanted to believe she had given him a chance, but in truth she had given him away. Would he ever forgive her if he lived long enough to understand? Sarah stumbled through the ruins, searching for scraps, for anything that could keep her alive. Deep down, she knew she would return. She could not stay away forever. Her baby's cry had not only broken the silence of the colony, it had broken the silence inside her. And so, though weak and starving, she promised herself that one day soon, she would find her way back to him, even if she had nothing left to give, even if the world hated her for it. She would face the human who had taken her child and beg for forgiveness. The choice she made in the darkness was not the end. It was the beginning of something she could not yet understand. David sat on the floor of his shelter, the baby cradled in his arms. The small creature shivered despite the layers of cloth wrapped around its fragile body. The child's breathing was shallow, chest rising and falling in quick, uneven motions. David had seen many broken machines, wounded animals, and even dying men, but nothing struck him as deeply as this tiny life, struggling against the pull of death. He poured a few drops of water onto a rag and touched it to the baby's lips. The child stirred weakly, swallowing with effort. David sighed with relief. At least there was still a will to live. Yet his relief was short-lived. Reality crashed into his mind like a hammer. What he was doing was dangerous, reckless, and against every law of the colony. Humans were forbidden to give food, water, or shelter to aliens. It was considered treason against the colony's survival. Supplies were scarce, and the leaders insisted they belonged only to humans. The patrols did not hesitate to punish anyone who broke this rule. David had seen neighbors dragged away in the night simply for hiding an alien child. He remembered the look of terror on their faces, and he knew that same fate could be his. He glanced toward the steel door of his hideout, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. His instincts told him to put the baby back outside, to pretend he had never heard the cries, to protect himself. Survival had always been his only rule, but when the baby whimpered softly, clutching his shirt with its tiny hand, that rule shattered. David leaned back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the flickering lamp. The shadows danced across the baby's face, making it look almost human. Innocent, helpless, and undeserving of the cruelty that had been forced upon it. He thought of the mother who had abandoned the child. What despair must have driven her, to leave her own flesh and blood in the dark? Perhaps she was starving, perhaps she believed this was the only chance for the child to survive. The thought twisted his chest. For years, David had walked through life with no one to care for but himself. He had convinced himself that solitude was strength, that caring for others only led to pain. Yet here he was, holding a life that depended on him completely. And instead of fear, he felt something different. Purpose. He rose and carried the baby to the corner where his supplies were stacked. The shelves were nearly empty. Half a loaf of bread, 2 sealed ration packs, a jug of water he had been saving. Sharing these with the child would mean hunger for himself, maybe even death if resupply did not come soon, but he did not hesitate. He crushed a piece of ration, mixed it with warm water, and fed it slowly to the child. The baby swallowed, then coughed, then swallowed again. Its tiny chest rose with slightly more strength. David smiled faintly. It was working. Against all odds, it was working. Still, the danger weighed heavy on him. If anyone discovered the child here, he would lose everything. He pictured the patrols knocking on his door, dragging him away while the baby screamed. He shook the thought from his mind and focused on the child's fragile breaths. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the baby's soft whimpers. David stayed awake, watching, protecting, listening to every sound outside. He felt like the world had shrunk to this single room, to this single fragile life. His eyes burned with exhaustion, yet he did not let sleep claim him. At dawn, faint, light slipped through a crack in the wall. The baby stirred and let out a soft cry. David held it closer, whispering, "You're safe now." His voice was steady, though his heart carried the weight of uncertainty. He stood and walked to the door, opening it just enough to scan the streets. The patrols had already begun their rounds. Their boots struck the ground with mechanical rhythm, their voices sharp as they barked orders. He pulled the door shut quickly, his breath caught in his throat. If they searched his shelter, he would be finished. David looked back at the baby, who lay bundled on the blanket, eyes closed in fragile sleep. He clenched his fists. He could still end this risk. He could take the baby outside and place it where he had found it. No one would know. He would be safe again. But when he stepped toward the door, his legs froze. He turned, staring at the child. That small chest, rising and falling, those tiny hands twitching as if dreaming. His mind replayed the moment the child's hand had gripped his shirt, that desperate plea for life. He could not do it. David dropped to his knees, running a hand through his hair. The decision burned inside him. Helping this child meant breaking the colony's laws. It meant hunger, danger, and fear. But abandoning it meant something far worse, losing the last piece of humanity he still had left. He made his choice. He would protect the baby, no matter the cost. As the morning sun rose higher, David whispered a promise, not to the colony, not to himself, but to the fragile life before him. You will not die in the darkness, not while I live. And in that vow, a human heart declared war against a world that had forgotten compassion. The night fell heavy on the colony. Cold winds crept through the cracks of David's shelter, carrying the stench of rust and smoke. He pulled his coat tighter around himself and looked at the small figure lying on the blanket. The baby's chest rose and fell quickly, too quickly, each breath rattling in its throat. Its skin burned with heat, yet its hands and feet were icy cold. Fear coiled in David's stomach. He knew the signs. The child was sick, perhaps from hunger, perhaps from the cold, perhaps from being abandoned. Too long in the alley. The fever had come fast, burning away the fragile strength the baby had gained in the last day. David rummaged through his supplies, hands shaking. He had bandages, scraps of cloth, some old tools, but no medicine. The colony's clinics were closed to aliens, and even if they had been open, he could not risk taking the child there. The patrols would see him, and that would be the end. The baby cried weakly, a sound more painful than silence. David knelt beside it, soaking a cloth in cool water and pressing it gently to the small forehead. The child stirred but did not open its eyes. Its breaths came in shallow bursts, each one pulling at David's chest like a blade. He whispered, "Stay with me," though he knew the child could not hear or understand. His voice cracked, but he kept speaking, as if the sound of human words might anchor the baby to life. Hours passed slowly, the lamp flickering against the walls. David fed the baby drops of water, wiped the sweat from its face, and held it against his chest to keep it warm. The fever rose and fell in waves, leaving him helpless, watching as life slipped between his fingers. At times, doubt pressed hard, on him. Maybe he was a fool for trying. Maybe saving this child was impossible. He thought of leaving it at the gates, hoping someone with more resources would take pity. But he knew better. The patrols would not pity. They would kill. He stayed awake through the long hours, eyes heavy, heart heavy, refusing to let go. The baby whimpered and shivered, its small fists curling against his chest. Every cry was softer than the last, and each one filled David with dread. He felt powerless, yet he would not surrender. Near midnight, he heard a sound outside. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps across the broken ground. His body tensed, every muscle ready. He blew out the lamp and crouched by the door, knife in hand, holding the baby close against his chest. The footsteps grew closer, uneven and weak, not the sharp march of patrol boots. Someone was wandering, barely able to stand. Then came a knock, soft, trembling, almost like a plea. David froze. No one came to his door at night. No one trusted him enough, and he trusted no one. He tightened his grip on the knife, silent, listening. Another knock, weaker than the first, then a voice, hoarse, broken, almost too quiet to hear. "Please, my child." David's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Or rather, he knew who it must belong to. The mother. He hesitated, torn between fear and anger. This was the woman who had left her baby to die in the alley. And now she was here knocking on his door, begging. Did she come to take the child back? Or had she followed its cries through the night? The baby whimpered against his chest, as if answering. David's heart pounded. He slowly opened the door a crack. A figure collapsed against the frame. A thin alien woman, her body nothing but skin and bone, her eyes hollow yet shining with desperate tears. She fell forward, barely able to lift her head. Her voice broke again. Please, don't hurt him. David caught her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than air, weaker than any person he had ever touched. He carried her inside and laid her near the lamp. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the baby. When she saw it still alive, still breathing, her face crumbled with relief. You saved him, she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. I thought he was gone. David stared at her, his mind torn. Anger fought with pity. You left him, he said harshly, his voice a growl. Alone, in the dark, he would have died. Her eyes closed, shame twisting her face. I had nothing, no food, no strength. I thought if I left him, maybe someone better would find him. I was right, you did. David wanted to shout, to demand how a mother could make such a choice, but the words stuck in his throat. He saw the truth in her eyes, the hunger, the despair, the love buried under helplessness. She had not abandoned her child out of cruelty. She had abandoned him out of desperation. The baby stirred in his arms and the woman reached out with trembling fingers. David hesitated, then slowly lowered the child into her embrace. The baby whimpered, then nestled against her chest. She held him tightly as if afraid the world might steal him away again. For a moment, silence filled the room. Not empty silence, but the fragile peace of a broken family reunited. David sat, back exhausted watching them. He knew the danger had grown. 2 lives now depended on him. 2 lives the colony would condemn. His supplies would run out faster, the risk of discovery greater. But as the night dragged on, he understood one thing clearly. He could not turn them away. Not now. Not ever. The fever had not yet broken, and the danger outside was still near, but hope had stepped through his door along with the starving mother, and hope was worth every risk. The storm outside had passed, but inside David's shelter the air still carried the weight of struggle. The baby lay curled in his mother's arms, his breathing shallow but steadier than before. The fever had not broken, yet warmth had returned to his cheeks. Sierra, the starving mother, rocked him gently, whispering words in her native tongue that David could not understand. But he did not need translation. The love in her voice was clear. David sat across from her, leaning against the metal wall. His eyes burned with exhaustion, yet he could not look away from the scene before him. Hours ago, this woman had been a shadow in the night, a stranger who left her child in the darkness. Now she sat trembling in his shelter, holding the same child as if her soul depended on it. Her face was pale, hollowed by hunger, her ribs pressed against her thin skin. Her hands shook with weakness. She had barely been able to walk when she knocked on his door, and even now her body swayed as if she might collapse at any moment. Yet her grip on the baby was strong, as though she could never let go again. David cleared his throat. You nearly killed him, he said, his voice low but sharp. Sarah bowed her head. I know, she whispered. I thought leaving him was the only way. My body had nothing left to give. I thought if I stayed we would both die. But you? She looked up at him, her violet eyes shimmering with tears. You gave him a chance. Her words struck him harder than he expected. He wanted to remain, angry, to hold on to the blame. Yet he saw no malice in her face, only guilt and desperation. She was not a monster. She was a mother who had been forced into an impossible choice. David stood and walked to the corner where his supplies were stacked. He brought her a piece of bread and a small cup of water. She hesitated before taking them, her hands trembling. Eat, he said firmly. You need strength? For him? Sierra's lips quivered. You would share with me? Even knowing what it costs you? David gave a short nod. What good is survival if we let children die? She pressed the bread to her lips, chewing slowly, her eyes never leaving her baby. The water she sipped carefully as though every drop was a treasure. David watched her uneasy. His supplies were shrinking fast. With only himself, he could stretch them for weeks. Now, with 2 more mouths to feed, he had no idea how long they would last. Yet something inside him had shifted. For years, his world had been narrow, focused only on his own survival. But now 2 fragile lives sat in his shelter, lives that depended on him. And though fear gnawed at him, so did a strange sense of purpose. The baby stirred and began to cry. Sierra tried to soothe him, but her milk had long since dried up. Her face crumpled with sorrow. David knelt beside her, mixing a little ration powder with water and feeding it to the child drop by drop. Slowly the cries faded, and the baby drifted back into uneasy sleep. Sarah watched silently, tears sliding down her cheeks. He trusts you, she whispered. He trusts you more than he trusts me. David shook his head. He needs both of us. He needs more than just food. He needs someone who will not abandon him again. Her shoulders shook with shame, but David's words were not cruel. They were steady like stone. She reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. Then let me stay. Let me help. I have nothing, but I can still fight for him if you let me. David looked at her hand, then at the baby's small face. The danger of keeping them both grew larger by the hour. The patrols were always searching for illegal refugees. If anyone suspected, if anyone heard the cries, it would be the end. Yet as he thought of turning them away, the memory of the alley returned. The sound of the baby's weak cry in the darkness, the sight of a small body, left to die. He could not relive that. He met her eyes. Then we do this together, he said. But understand, it will not be easy. Food, water, safety, everything will be harder, and if the patrols find us, there will be no mercy. Sarah nodded. I know, but if I must die, I would rather die fighting to keep him alive than live knowing I left him behind. For the first time. David felt a strange respect for her. Weak as she was, she still had the will to protect her child. She had made a terrible choice, but now she had returned to face it. That in its own way was courage. The baby whimpered in his sleep, and both of them leaned closer, as though drawn by the same thread. 2 strangers, human and alien, united by the fragile life between them. Outside, the night deepened. The patrols marched past, their torches casting cruel light through the cracks in the wall. David's hand moved to his knife as he listened to their footsteps, every muscle tense. But the patrols moved on and silence returned. He exhaled slowly, glancing at Sarah. She was already watching him, her eyes filled not only with gratitude but with trust. For the first time in many years, David realized he was no longer alone. And though danger pressed against every wall, inside this small room there was something stronger than fear, a fragile alliance born of desperation, and a promise that this child would not be abandoned again. The days passed slowly, each one a battle for survival inside David's small shelter. The baby grew stronger, his cries louder, his skin warmer. Sarah gained a little strength too, though her body still showed the scars of hunger. She helped, as best she could, cleaning the blankets, searching through broken scraps outside when it was safe, and caring for her child with a devotion that burned through her exhaustion. But with every sound the baby made, David's fear grew heavier. The cries that once gave him hope now carried danger. Walls were thin, neighbors were curious, and patrols never stopped hunting for signs of hidden aliens. Each time the baby's voice rose, David felt the shadows press closer. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged skyline, a sharp knock echoed against his door. David's blood froze. Sarah clutched her baby, holding him tight against her chest. The knock came again, louder this time. "David," a man's voice called. It was one of his neighbors, a wiry man named Clark who often scavenged nearby. "I heard something last night, sounded like crying. Are you hiding someone in there?" David forced his voice steady. "Just rats," he said, moving quickly to block the door with his body. "You know how they sound." There was a pause. Clark laughed, but it was not friendly. "Funny, rats don't sound like children. You be careful, friend. Patrols pay well for news like that." His footsteps faded into the street, leaving silence behind. David shut the door and locked it, his jaw clenched. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear. "He knows," she whispered. David nodded grimly. "He suspects. And that is enough." That night, David sat awake with his knife across his knees, listening to every sound outside. The baby slept in Sarah's arms, but even in sleep, his small cries broke the silence. David knew it was only a matter of time before Clark told the patrols. The next day, the threat grew. Boots echoed on the street as patrols marched closer than before. Their torches cast long beams through cracks in the walls. David peeked through a slit in the door and saw 2 guards stopping neighbors, asking questions, searching corners. His chest tightened. He turned back to Sarah. "We cannot stay hidden forever," he said. "If they search this place, we are finished." Sarah looked down at her child. "Then what do we do?" David had no answer. His mind raced through possibilities, sneaking them out of the colony, hiding them in the wastelands, bribing the guards, but each plan carried almost no chance of success. And yet doing nothing meant certain death. That evening, Clark returned. He did not knock this time. He stood outside the door, his voice sly. "David, patrols will be back tomorrow. If you want me to stay quiet, it will cost you." David gritted his teeth. "What do you want?" "Half your supplies," Clark said. "Every week. Or maybe I tell the patrols to check your shelter." Sarah's face paled, and she pulled the baby closer. David's fists clenched, rage burning in his chest. He wanted to open the door and strike Clark down, but violence would draw more suspicion. He forced his voice calm. "Fine," he said. "Come back tomorrow." Clark laughed again and walked away. When the sound of his footsteps disappeared, David sat heavily against the wall, his face grim. Sarah touched his arm. "We cannot feed him and pay your neighbor too. We will starve." "I know," David said quietly, "but we cannot let him speak. Not yet." That night, as the baby cried softly, David listened to the patrols march past his door. Their boots struck the ground like drums of judgment. One wrong sound, one wrong move, and they would break the door down. He held his knife tighter, his mind sharper than ever. The baby coughed, his small voice echoing too loud in the silence. David moved quickly, wrapping him in thicker cloth to muffle the sound. His heart pounded, sweat ran down his back. Outside, the footsteps slowed. A torchlight swept across the wall, stopping for a long moment. David did not breathe. Then at last, the light moved on. The patrols passed. David exhaled, his chest aching. He looked at Sarah, who clutched her child tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "We cannot live like this forever," she whispered. David nodded, his face set in grim resolve. "Then we won't. If the colony will not let him live, then we must find a place that will. But until then, we must survive each night, each patrol, each knock on the door." The shelter fell quiet again, but the silence was fragile, filled with the weight of discovery waiting just outside. Every creak of wood, every cry of the baby, every whisper from a neighbor could bring doom crashing through the door. And David knew the greatest battle was yet to come. Dawn broke over the colony, painting the metal roofs with pale light. Inside the shelter, David sat with his back to the wall, his knife still in his hand. He had not slept. Sarah dozed lightly with the baby in her arms, her head resting against his shoulder. For a brief moment, the room felt like a fragile picture of peace, but David knew it could shatter at any second. The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Sarah woke instantly, rocking him gently and whispering words of comfort. David watched them, his heart heavy yet strangely full. He had lived so many years with no one beside him, only silence and survival. Now, in this small corner of the world, he felt something different. He felt responsible, not just for himself, but for them. A sound outside shattered the moment. Boots, voices, patrols. David moved quickly, peering through a crack in the wall. 4 guards marched down the street, their torches burning even in daylight. Behind them walked Clark, his sly grin clear on his thin face. David's chest tightened. Clark had betrayed him. He turned to Sarah. "Hide in the back, now." Sarah's eyes widened, but she obeyed. She slipped behind a broken wall with the baby, holding him close, covering his mouth gently. David stood by the door, every muscle tense. The knock came hard and sharp. "Open up," one of the guards demanded. "We have reason to believe you are harboring an alien." David's mind raced. He could fight, but 4 armed men would overwhelm him. He could deny, but Clark's lies had already poisoned their ears. Still, he pulled the door open slowly, standing tall in the frame. "There are no aliens here," David said firmly. "You waste your time." The guards pushed past him, searching the shelter. They tore through blankets, opened crates, and scattered his meager supplies. Clark stood smirking near the door, waiting for the moment of discovery. David's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. One of the guards moved toward the back wall. Sarah crouched there, clutching her baby. David's heart pounded. He stepped forward, blocking the guard's path. "You will find nothing," David said, his voice hard as steel. The guard sneered. "Move aside." For a moment, the room filled with tension sharp enough to cut. David knew he could not win this fight with blades or fists. He had only one weapon left: his courage. He lifted his chin and spoke loud enough for them all to hear. "This colony calls itself human, but what kind of humans leave children to die in the streets? I will not be part of that. If there is guilt in giving life a chance, then I am guilty." The guards hesitated, surprised by his defiance. Clark's smile faltered. The baby whimpered softly from the shadows, and the sound pierced the silence. The guards turned toward the noise, but David did not step aside. "You want to drag me away?" he challenged. "Do it, but you will have to admit to the colony that you punish a man for saving a starving child, and if you have even a shred of humanity left, you will not." The room hung still. One of the younger guards shifted uncomfortably, his grip on his weapon loosening. Another muttered, "Orders are orders." But their eyes told a different story. David's words had struck something deep, something their leaders had tried to bury: conscience. Finally, the captain spat on the ground. "Watch yourself, David. One mistake and you will pay," he motioned to his men. "We are done here." The guards left, their boots echoing down the street. Clark stared in disbelief. "You cannot protect them forever," he hissed before hurrying after the patrol. David closed the door and locked it, his whole body shaking. Sarah emerged from the shadows, tears streaming down her face. She clutched her baby and whispered, "You risked everything for us." David met her eyes. "Not just for you, for what it means to be human." She stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Then humanity is not lost. Not while men like you still live." The baby let out a soft cry, but this time it was not a cry of weakness. It was stronger, louder, filled with the stubborn will to live. David smiled faintly, listening to it echo in the small room. For the first time in years, he felt hope. Hope that compassion could survive even in the harshest world. Hope that bonds between strangers could become family. The patrols would return. The dangers would not vanish, but David no longer feared the darkness outside, for in his shelter he had found a light stronger than fear. The starving mother who had once left her baby to die now held him safe in her arms. and the human who had once lived only for himself now stood beside them, protector and friend. In that fragile alliance, in that act of defiance, humanity's heart was revealed.